When you look at this image, do you see a glass half full or a glass half empty? Chances are, it depends on your current perspective and mood in this very moment. As is the case with Disney's Hollywood Studios, a park that some days when you visit can be the best part of your Disney World vacation, and other days can be the worst theme park day you've ever experienced in your entire life. It has somehow managed to be a park that is both good, bad, and ugly all at the same time. Now, to be fair to modern day Hollywood Studios, this is an improvement over what Hollywood Studios used to be back in the day. There was so little to do that most people didn't find it worth visiting, and as a result, it found itself consistently at the bottom of the attendance rankings at the Disney World parks. But Disney was determined to change this, and starting in 2018, Hollywood Studios began a massive overhaul, with Toy Story Land opening in 2018 and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge opening in 2019, two brand new lands that had only replaced, really, 2 major attractions. That's it. And we got 4 attractions in their stead, plus, of course, massive themed lands with new shops and restaurants. Sprinkle on top of this the opening of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway in 2020, and all of a sudden, you were looking at a brand spanking new Hollywood Studios. With significantly more to do at the park and a fresh attraction lineup, all of a sudden Hollywood Studios was back on people's radars. And if you were visiting Hollywood Studios in this time, you were eating good. And you know who else was eating good? Disney. Or at least they would eventually, as of course the pandemic would result in the parks closing down shortly after these additions had all finally opened, thus delaying the eventual spike in attendance that Hollywood Studios was destined to get as a result of these new additions. And in 2022, for the first time ever in Hollywood Studios history, it became the second most attended park in the Walt Disney World chain. Sounds all fine and dandy, right? But this is where that glass half empty perspective starts to creep in. Because even though Disney added all these new attractions, they actually didn't have as much effective capacity as they previously had at the park. Because keep in mind, these 2 attractions they got rid of, the Backlot Tour and Lights Motor Action, had massive capacity. These were massive people eaters. Not only could they accommodate a ton of guests at once, but they also took a long time. These were long experiences, thus keeping people out of the rest of the park for a significant amount of time and lowering lines and crowds elsewhere. Ultimately, none of the new attractions that Disney added filled that gap. In fact, most of them have lower capacity than your average Disney World attraction, with the exception of maybe Smuggler's Run. However, to be fair to Disney, it's not like they were completely blind to this fact. Rise of the Resistance was supposed to have much higher capacity than it's proven to have, but because of operational inefficiencies and constant downtime due to the complexity of the ride system and all the effects at work, it ultimately has not been able to give the park the capacity it needs to handle all these new guests coming. And even with Disney shutting off a lot of effects on Rise of Resistance to try and get it to be more operationally efficient, it still has not been able to meet the capacity demands of the park. And of course, when park attendance outpaces park capacity, what you're left with is long lines everywhere. Not even kidding, Hollywood Studios might have some of the worst wait times in the entire country, with several attractions having over an hour-long wait on a daily basis. And these capacity issues have only gotten worse, as Rock and Roller Coaster, one of the park's major attractions, faced a lengthy refurbishment in 2023, causing it to be closed for majority of the year, only for it to reopen, continue to have issues, and now have to close once again for a second stint of refurbishments here in 2024, causing the park to be downed another attraction. And that's a big deal outside of the whole capacity thing, because despite all these new additions, the park still does not have a lot to do. With just 10 rides to its name, if you include Muppet Vision 3D, it finds itself near the bottom of the totem pole in the Orlando market as far as number of things to do, with maybe just Animal Kingdom and SeaWorld sitting behind it. And mind you, when Universal's Epic Universe opens up next year in 2025, it will actually open up with more rides than Hollywood Studios, with a total of 11 at opening day. And that's a park that has plenty of expansions planned for the future, versus a park in Hollywood Studios that's already 30 years old. And when you combine the long wait times with the lack of things to do, that's when you get the really miserable days. Because not only are you stuck waiting in long lines all day, but because of how long the lines are, you don't even get close to getting everything done at a park that already does not have a lot for you to do in the first place. So you end up walking away extremely disappointed in what you managed to accomplish. But then I look at this glass again and I think, man, I don't know. Because yes, they don't have a lot of attractions in their lineup, but man, that attraction lineup is great. It is chock full of elite attractions within the Disney World chain. I mean, Muppet Vision 3D is hilarious and holds some historical sentimentality given that it was Jim Henson's last major film project that he worked on. Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway is surprisingly charming and a ton of fun, and even though it had massive shoes to fill in replacing the beloved attraction, the Great Movie Ride, I think it successfully pulled it off in being a great addition to the park. Toy Story Mania, though basically just a video game, is a ton of fun, and arguably, I know, listen, Universal fans, you're gonna get mad at me for saying this, I may even go as far as to say it might be the best shooting attraction I've ever been on. Not even kidding, it is so great.
Sorry.
Not to mention, this park has a great show lineup, which is not something that many other parks can claim. Indiana Jones is an absolute blast and is a fantastic last remaining remnant of the studio era where we get to see the behind the scenes of how the movies are made. Fantasmic rivals any nighttime show out there, and Beauty and the Beast, let me just tell you, it makes me tear up every time I watch it. I'm not afraid to admit it. Rock and Roller Coaster, though a mid-coaster anywhere else, is great in the context of Walt Disney World. And of course, how can we talk about the attractions of Hollywood Studios without mentioning Rise of the Resistance? What is there to say about this attraction that already hasn't been said? Well, nothing, so I won't say anything else. But what I will say is that we really cannot finish off talking about this without talking about the piece de resistance of Hollywood Studios, and that is the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. This ride, and I will not accept any slander in the comments, is the best attraction in all of Walt Disney World. This thing is the one bastion of thrill across the entire Disney World resort. The airtime on this thing is insane. If it wasn't for the absurd wait times at this park, I would ride this thing all day. And with that being its core piece of the puzzle, it really makes Hollywood Studios' ride lineup rival that of any of the other ones in the Disney World chain. But don't get it twisted, there's a reason why this sword is double-edged, because this park also happens to be home to some of the worst rides in all of Disney World, with Star Tours and Smuggler's Run basically being the exact same ride. They're both standstill motion simulators themed to Star Wars. Why in the world are there two of them? I don't know, because both of them suck! They're both uncomfortable, nausea-inducing, and feel absolutely ancient in compared to other screen rides across both Disney World and Universal Orlando. So as you can see, this park is basically like playing ping pong inside your head, because one second you'll be saying, man, this park is awesome, and then the next you'll be saying, man, this park is absolutely terrible. And it absolutely makes for a tricky situation when booking it on your trip itinerary, because you simply don't know what kind of day you're gonna get. I've had days where I've gone to this park and had a fantastic time, and then other days I've literally had the worst day I've ever had in a theme park ever. There was one time I visited in President's Day of 2021, and it was the absolute most miserable time I've ever had at a theme park. The lines were insane, rides were breaking down left and right, and poor little old me couldn't even get a boarding pass for Rise of the Resistance. So yeah, it was a really miserable day for me back then. And make no mistake about it, folks, the future of Hollywood Studios is a double-edged sword as well, with a bit of uncertainty sprinkled on top, as yes, we are getting the Voyage of Little Mermaid returning to the park later this year in 2024, presumably revamped with better effects and show scenes and whatnot, so that'll be great, and that will certainly add some capacity back to the park. And though the park probably could have used a new ride instead of another show, it still will be a welcome addition for sure. What will also be great is the return of Rock and Roller Coaster back from its now annual refurbishment. Hopefully that actually gets fixed permanently and it can actually stay up and be operationally efficient going forward. However, those two things are not going to solve all of Hollywood Studios' issues. there still is going to be a lack of things to do. There still is going to be a lack of capacity. The lines are still going to be outrageous. But there is reason to hold out hope. I mean, there's plenty of room for expansion at this park. Star Wars Launch Bay, a giant building dedicated just a handful of meet and greets, could absolutely be bulldozed and moved over to Galaxy's Edge. It's not necessarily needed over here. Plus, there's even a tiny expansion pad behind Launch Bay that could be looped in. You could even make a tiny little mini land back there with maybe 1 or 2 attractions that could really help out the park. Now, again, I don't necessarily think that that's going to be enough to completely resolve the issues, but it most certainly would improve the park, undoubtedly so. Looking further down the line, Hollywood Studios, being landlocked by the road, would likely have to expand into the parking lot and build a parking structure either for employees or for guests. Either way, it would be an expensive venture for Disney to expand the park any further outside of that without actually replacing anything. Which is why I don't necessarily know if Hollywood Studios is going to get any sort of major investment going forward, because that would require them to actually replace something in order to add something to the park. There's no real open plots for straight up expansion. Meaning any new addition to the park would be a lot more expensive than Disney would realistically like to spend, making me extremely doubtful of any future investments, even though Hollywood Studios needs the help. And though Disney knows this, they know that Hollywood Studios is facing capacity issues and has been for a long time, because they already invested all this money into the parks with Toy Story Land and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and other attractions. Ultimately, Hollywood Studios has found itself at the back of the line for new additions and expansions, as Magic Kingdom and Animal Kingdom seem to be getting all the love right now. Don't get me wrong, Magic Kingdom and Animal Kingdom certainly need help as well, but as a result of Disney having these focus on other parks, it leaves Hollywood Studios kind of left for dead, because we're likely not going to see any of these issues resolved at Hollywood Studios, and it's going to continue to be a glass half full, glass half empty park where, yeah, the rides are great. Yeah, it's nice that we have some new additions here, but ultimately, it's a park that has some stinkers in its lineup and ultimately doesn't have a whole lot to do. And even if you wanted to try and do everything, you really couldn't, because the wait times are just ridiculous. So I don't know what the future holds for Hollywood Studios, but what I do know is whether or not I visit this park in the future is ultimately going to come down to how I view this glass. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think that Hollywood Studios is a great park? Do you think it's a bad park? Do you agree with me and think that it's kind of a mixed bag? Let me know. Love to hear what you have to say. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace.